Let's just start off with the simple stuff. What is your name?
My name is Aeryn Gillern.
So when did you become a police officer?
I became a police officer August 19th, 1985.
And how long were you a police officer?
And I was a police officer for 21 years at the Ithaca Police Department.
What do you think makes a good police officer?
I think what makes a good police officer is being able to empathize with the people that you're dealing with. I think police culture, for the most part, has us versus them mentality. And if you do that, then you can't be a good police officer. I think you have to be able to somehow go with the adage of there, but by the grace of God goes me, whether it's the bad person you're arresting or the victim of a crime. It could be you or it could be someone that you love.
We heard from a very impressive young policewoman who was hired as a community neighborhood police officer, and she talked about the difference that has made in the lives of the people of this community.
Okay, let's move on now to talk about Aeryn a little bit. When you think about Aeryn, what are the first words that come to your mind?
Gone. I last saw Aeryn September 20th, 2007. He had been home for 10 days. Aeryn was a big boy. He was about 6'2", very muscular, wore a size 13.5 shoe, and he did all his shopping at JCPenney's. And so he had to come home every couple of years to do his shopping. And so we ran from one Penny's store to the other for the 10 days that he was here. And the last time I saw him was when I took him to the airport. He was very happy. I had 2 foster kittens here when he was here, and he'd never been a cat person. And he fell in love with this one little kitten, Woofy.
Woofy. This is Wolfie, a girl. There she goes.
His favorite place in this area is the plantations at Cornell, and we ended up going there 3 times while he was here. And then he spent some time with my mother, and we spent time just talking, watching some movies, and definitely shopping. Aeryn loved to shop. I remember him calling, and I was thinking about it the other day because I remember laughing when he called me, and it had to be, I think, 1999 maybe, and I had known he was gay since he was a teenager, and it was just, Aeryn was gay, and that was it. It wasn't anything, we talked about it, he didn't talk about it, so I didn't talk about it, but I knew he was gay. So when he called and he says, well, I have something very important to tell you, and I said, what is it? And he says, well, I'm gay, and I started laughing. And he says, I can't believe you're laughing at me. And I said, well, what other response would you want? I said, I know you're gay. He says, you do? Well, who else knows? I said, well, grandmother knows. He says, she does. He said, well, damn it, I wanted to call her and tell her. I said, well, call her. I said, give me 5 minutes, I'll call her and tell her to act surprised. So I called her, and she says, well, of course Aeryn's gay. And I said, well, act surprised. So she did, and then he called me back an hour later, and he says, oh, it was great. He says, she pretended she didn't know, and it was just, hello, Aeryn, you know. Aeryn had encouraged me to put the house on the market, which I did. And so one of the things that we did when he was home in September of 2007 was talk about me coming to live with him once I sold the house. He wanted me to come and stay with him in Vienna for 6 months and come and experience what it was like living in Europe. So that was the plan. You know, move to Vienna, stay with him. He had things for me to do, people for me to meet, and he was going to keep me busy, and it was going to be quite the experience.
So these plans were in the works?
Oh, yeah, they were definitely in the works. We had plans. On October 27th, I called him to let him know that I had had some people look at the house, but I still had no offers. So we talked about me coming over to Vienna the first week of December for 7 to 10 days. And we talked about going to the Christmas market and to the Punz Festival, and he loved that. And so I was looking forward to that.
Hi, this is Kathy. I'm not able to come to the phone right now. Please leave a message after the beep. Thank you.
On October 31st, 2007, I was the director of the Cortland County SPCA, and I was at work. It was about 1 or 1:30 in the afternoon, and the secretary from the Ithaca Police Department, who I was friends with, called me and told me that I needed to go home, that there was a phone message waiting for me. And I said, what do you mean? She says, Kathy, you need to go home. And I could tell by her tone of voice that something had happened. And I kept pressing her, and finally she started crying and told me that Aeryn was missing. And I just jumped up and told everyone I had to go home and drove home very quickly. And there was a message on my answering machine.
Good afternoon, my name is Mr. Maselli.
There was a message from Paul Maselli, who was the assistant HR director at UNIDO, telling me that Aeryn was missing.
I will appreciate if you can call me as soon as you get this message. My number is 00431165. Thank you. Bye.
I immediately called Mr. Maselli in Vienna. He told me that Aeryn didn't come to work. He hadn't been seen since October 29th, when he left and signed out at 6 p.m., and that Aeryn had never missed work before, that he had taken days off and taken vacation or sick time, but he always called in. And they knew Tuesday when he didn't call in and didn't show up that something was wrong. And then they were also alerted by his partner that he was unable to get a hold of him. I then called Posse, and at that point, they knew nothing. He and Umberto, who was my son's upstairs neighbor, knew nothing. They had called around to various friends of Aeryn, and nobody had seen or heard from him. Umberto, the upstairs neighbor, had Aeryn's apartment key, so they were able to go into his apartment. They saw where he had a load of wash in, and the apartment was exactly the way Posse had left it, because Posse had spent the weekend with Aeryn and had left the morning of the 29th prior to Aeryn going to work. They were able to call around to some people, and they called a friend of Aeryn's, Georg, and Georg told them that he would call people and see. Georg was able to talk to someone who had heard secondhand that Aeryn had been at the Kaiser Brundel sauna on the evening of October 29th, and Posse and Umberto immediately went to the sauna and spoke with the manager, Gunther, and Gunther told them he did not see what happened, but that there had been a fight, that he understood there was a fight with tourists, and that he had called the police, and that the police didn't respond, that an ambulance had came, and someone had to, and he just kept on saying someone had to go to the hospital in the ambulance. And he told them it was at 10 o'clock at night and that Aeryn ran out of the sauna. And they didn't know whether he was injured or not, but he had been in the vicinity of the fight. So prior to me going to Vienna, I left on November 1st, the day after I heard about this information. I knew that my son was missing and that something had happened to him at the sauna. I do remember the flight over to Vienna. It was very surreal. I remember thinking that I was going to visit Aeryn and being very calm, considering, because I kept on thinking that Aeryn was going to meet me at the airport. I had only booked the flight for a week because I thought I'll spend a couple days with him and find out, you know, what happened. I don't know, was he hurt? And then I'll come home. And then just make plans to go back over there in December for early Christmas. I didn't want to believe that something had happened to him. I just wanted to believe that everything was going to be okay. When I arrived in Vienna, Pasi met me, and we took the train in, and of course I had lots of suitcases. When we were approximately 5 minutes away from the apartment, Umberto called and said that there were 2 investigators at Aeryn's door.
So this is Aeryn's building here.
And Pasi told them that we would be there immediately. You know, don't open the door until we get there.
Aeryn's apartment faced Handel Sky, but this is the door that he would walk into.
So when we arrived, the 2 investigators and Umberto were standing outside of Aeryn's apartment door.
On the 5th floor.
My first impressions of them were not good. They wouldn't look at me. There was no eye contact whatsoever. They didn't say anything to me. They just glanced at me and then turned toward the door and waited for Umberto to unlock the door. They walked in, and you could see under his bed from the doorway, but they walked in and made a point of getting on their hands and knees and looking under the bed. There was nothing under the bed, you could see that. And then they walked into his living room and they pulled out the sofa couch. And then we were standing in the doorway, and then they came back to the doorway and they spoke to Umberto, and Umberto asked me for my passport. And the one took the passport and started writing down information, and the other one just stood there. So I said to him, I said, do you speak English? And he shrugged and he went, yeah. And I said, I pulled out my police retirement badge, and I said, I am a retired police officer, and in America, police officers take care of police officers. And he just went, and that was it. As a police officer, I was amazed, I was shocked, and I was angry at the fact that they never greeted me and that they did this cursory search. It was ridiculous.
It's the mail room in the main entry. If you go through that door down there, and to the left, it would take you down into the basement where Aeryn kept his bike.
I just had this sinking feeling that this, just as bad as I knew it was going to get worse. After Umberto and the investigators left, Pasi and I went immediately to Unido, which is just 2 train stops away from my son's apartment. We met with Mrs. Antonopoulou, who was the director of HR for Unido, and Mr. Maselli and a few other people. And they all shared concern again that Aeryn was missing, that this was totally unlike Aeryn. And Mrs. Antonopoulou said, let's call the police. Should we call the police? And I said, I think that's a good idea. So we went into Mrs. Antonopoulou's office alone, just her and I, and she called the police department, and she spoke to Investigator Weiss, who turned out to be the investigator who was at my son's apartment just 2 hours or so before that, and who had said yeah when I asked him if he spoke English. She put him on speakerphone, and she asked him what they think had happened to my son. he said that they had searched the Danube Canal, which is different than the Danube River, because a fisherman had called them at 20 after 8 on October 29th and said that he saw a bald-headed man float by in the river. He told her that at 20 after 8, they received the phone call from the fisherman and that they immediately dispatched the scuba team, the K-9 unit, the fire department, and that the scuba team went into the water and searched for my son, and that they dredged the canal, and that the K-9 unit searched the area, and the fire department also did a walking search. And then at 10 of 9, exactly half an hour after the phone call, they cleared the scene. And she was listening to this before she started translating this. She kept on shaking her head and writing me notes. This doesn't make sense. This just doesn't make sense. She just kept on writing that over and over again. So I thought that they had searched the sauna, around the sauna. So I said, well, ask him if they used my son's clothes to search around the sauna. And his reply to her is, why would they search around the sauna? He said, the sauna doesn't matter, it doesn't, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. He just kept on saying that over and over again, because she'd write it down and then she'd translate it to me. And so they were totally disregarding the sauna, which was like, wait a minute, you know that his belongings were at the sauna, and you're not making this connection anywhere. I said, how could they have done all this in half an hour? I mean, it takes time to suit up, it takes time to get there, and I told her, I said, ask him about the K-9 unit. And what did they have to search for my son? If they didn't know it was my son, how were they searching? How did they put the dog on a scent? And then he came back, and you remember her rolling her eyes, and she says, well, if he said that if you were really a police officer, that you'd understand how K-9s work. And I thought, oh, this is not good. And then the story changed to, well, the fisherman saw, he didn't see a bald-headed man, he saw a body float by, and he called the police. So, I mean, within, a matter of an hour, the story was starting to disintegrate. I was at Aeryn's apartment. I was asleep November 3rd in the morning, and Pasi and Umberto woke me up and told me that Lieutenant Ornstein, who was the security person who was being the liaison between the UN and the police, was on the phone. As soon as I answered the phone, he told me that I needed to get in touch with the embassy immediately. And I said, why, what's going on? He said, there's something wrong. The police are changing their stories. He said, there's something wrong. I don't know what it is, but you need to get in touch with the embassy immediately. So I said, okay. And so he gave me a number, so I wrote it down. And I remember I got up and I went to the bathroom, and the phone rang again, and it was Lieutenant Ornstein again. And he said, have you called them? I said, well, not yet. He said, you need to call them. He said, you need to call them immediately. He said, I just had another call from the police, and the story has changed again. He said, something is terribly wrong. He said, they keep changing the stories, and he said, this is not good. He said, we need to do something else. And he says, I am going to call them, and he said, we'll arrange for somebody from HR to go with you to the police department. They'll call you and let you know what time the meeting's going to be. So that afternoon, Sandra, Pasi, and myself went to meet with the police. And initially, there were 3 plainclothes investigators in the office, and 2 of them were smoking. And I remember feeling quite nauseous. The room wasn't very big. And I walked over to a window, and I realized that someone was literally right on top of me, and I turned, and one of the investigators, was quite large, was standing literally an inch behind me. And Sandra, who is bilingual, said, "He doesn't want you near the window." And I said, "Well, I'm not jumping out the window. I just need air. The smoke is bothering me." She says, "He wants you to sit down." And I said, "Tell him I feel sick." And so she did, and he says, "He still wants you to sit down." So I said, "Okay." So I went and I sat down, and again, I did put my hands under my legs, and he stood right behind me. And the only thing I could think of was that he was trying to intimidate me. And I don't think I looked dangerous, you know? I didn't think I looked like I was gonna cause them harm. And there was 3 of them there, but it was just very uncomfortable. And then I asked for water, and they didn't have any water. And then I asked to go to the bathroom, and they didn't have a bathroom. And finally, I just couldn't hold it in any longer, and I started crying.
Tell me what their theory is, just based on the conversation you had with them that day, sitting there. What are they telling you happened to your son?
Their theory is that he was in the sauna and that there was some kind of disturbance, and he ran out and committed suicide.
Because?
Because he's gay, he's emotionally unbalanced, he's HIV positive, and gays who are all these things commit spontaneous suicide all the time in Austria. And Pasi says, well, no, he was regularly tested, and he wasn't HIV positive, and he received his results on October 29th. You know, when he was at work, I know he was HIV negative. And they said, well, how do you know this? And he says, because I talked to him.
And he ran out at 6:50.
He ran out at 6:50.
Now Pasi is sitting there telling them this is impossible.
Right. He's telling them it's impossible. He's telling them that he was SMS'd at 20 minutes to 8, that Aeryn had received a phone call from a friend of his, Arnissa, at 20 after 7, and talked to her for more than 10 minutes. So he must have gotten off the phone with Arnissa and then SMS'd Pasi.
So the 6:50 thing is just, it's impossible.
It's impossible. So then the investigator who's talking to Pasi then says, well, Aeryn's time thing on his phone must be wrong. So Sandra says in English and then says it to German to them. She says, well, that's impossible because you don't set the time on your phone. It's set by the company. And it's not something you change. It is what it is.
I mean, when you're listening to this new theory,
I'm thinking this is utter bullcrap. You know, they throw out that, oh, wasn't he Mr. Gay Austria? You know, and they ask Pasi, did you know he was Mr. Gay Austria? And Sandra turns to me and she says, she looks at me, and I remember her closing her eyes and going like this. She says, and just basically through clenched teeth, she says, he wants me to ask you if you're proud that your son was Mr. Gay Austria. And I just sat there and I thought, how much more surreal can this be? And I looked at her and I just looked at the investigator and I put on probably the fakest smile I've ever done, and I said, extremely, extremely proud. Everybody loved Aeryn. I mean, everybody loved Aeryn. So him being homosexual was no big deal because he was still Aeryn.
Aeryn Michael John Gillern.
He actually went to seminary after Franciscan University in Vienna and Graz, but he was told that He could be a celibate gay priest, but he'd have to be willing to preach against homosexuality, and that's when he left the seminary, because he couldn't do that. I'm outraged. I'm still in shock, because I still want to believe that Aeryn's going to walk in a door. So part of me was thinking, this doesn't matter what they say, because Aeryn's going to walk in a door. And the other part of me is, something happened to my son, and I'm never going to know, because they don't give a damn. They plain and simple don't give a damn. The next day, November 4th, one of the other UNIDO people who just wanted to keep me busy and make sure I was eating came and picked me up, and we walked the canal.
If you can go number than numb, if you can be more incredulous than you already are, I'm just tired.
At that point, I thought, if Aeryn's in the canal, then I should find him. And so we walked the canal for as far as we could walk it, and I just walked looking along the edge, thinking, that if he was there, that maybe he was like caught on rocks or something. But there weren't any fishermen, and up further there was people walking. There was a walking trail, but not in that section, because we walked down to that section and you could only walk a certain way. And there was just beer bottles and glass and cigarettes, and we even saw a couple syringes down there, so it was not a nice area. And then we had to walk back up to street level and walk a ways before you could walk along, and where there was an actual walking path where people walk.
We walked along the trail here and got to the point where we could see down into the water, where it was shallower on the edges, and you could see tree branches and rocks and stuff. And
do you know who the fisherman was?
No. I have no idea who the fisherman was. I have never seen the report. The embassy asked for the report. I've asked for the report, and I have never seen the report. The State Department asked for the report. Nobody's ever seen the report. I've seen it in a pile across the table. Vienna is a very pedestrian-friendly city, and people are constantly walking around. Even after the shops are closed, people are walking around. Doesn't matter what the temperature is, people are sitting outside. You'll see, it's not unusual to see people sitting with the sheep-lined, chairs, sitting outside having their coffee, because it's a very outdoor place to be. People are just always around. I never was out there without people all around me. And the Kaiserbrunndel is located probably 2 blocks off the Kartnerstrasse, which is one of the main shopping tourist areas. And all these little side streets have shops and restaurants and coffee houses and churches. Directly across the street from the Kaiserbrunndel is a church which has an evening mass. So there's people coming to mass. Kitty corner to it is a coffee house. I was never out there alone, never. I asked the police if they had any witnesses, and the answer was no. There was no other witnesses. just the fishermen. And the fisherman's story changed from a bald-headed man within, I think, a couple of, was it a day or two, changed to, or it might have been the same day, changed to a body floating, to a scream and a splash, to a splash, to a scream, to, well, a scream in the distance.
Right now it is 20 after 7. We're standing in front of the Kaiserbrundel. I am now going to make the walk that supposedly the police, there's people coming, and how Aeryn got to the canal. That's how they decided. This route, I don't know. This is a restaurant up here. There's people going in and out of the restaurant. People walking dogs. I'm walking past the Franciscan church. Obviously, I'm not running, as they said Aeryn was, but I'm walking as briskly as I can. As you can see on the left, this is a restaurant, all glassed in, people sitting in the window. This is the cross street that even if Aeryn had come down from the Kaiserbrundel 1 block up, meaning the direction I'm facing, he would have had to cross this busy street. Here is a large hotel, trams, traffic, pedestrians. If you look this way, that's the Schwedensplatz down there. And if you look this way, the building that's lit up is Urania. So in going with the police map, Aeryn would have crossed here and would have ran into an iron gate, not the steps. The jump from here down to there, I would think would be pretty maiming.
On November 6th, I got a call from Lieutenant Unstein saying that I should meet him at the UN, that we were going to go to the police department and pick up Aeryn's belongings. So I went to UNIDO and met with him, and he was very quiet. And we went to the police department, the same police department, and Investigator Weiss was there, and there was another investigator there, the one who had been typing up the report when he was talking to Bassi. He sat over in the corner, and he just sat there with his head down. And Investigator Weiss just stood there, and he had this huge plastic garbage bag on the floor, and he pointed at it, and he said something to Lieutenant Unstein. Unstein said, "That's your son's stuff. That's your son's belongings." And so I sat down on the floor, and I opened the bag, and I could smell Aeryn. And I took his T-shirt out, and I just kept smelling it, and I couldn't stop crying. And I asked for Kleenex, and Unstein asked Investigator Weiss, and he said no. And I told him I was going to get sick. And Lieutenant Unstein told him, and he just shrugged his shoulders. And finally I said, "You gotta let me use the bathroom, please, so I can get sick." And Lieutenant Unstein raised his voice. And finally, the investigator who'd been sitting over to the side got up,
and went like this, and Einstein told me to follow, and I went to the bathroom, and I just kept getting sick. And Einstein said, let's go. And so I picked up this huge bag that was all left my son. And out we went. Nobody said anything to us. And we're walking down the street, and Einstein told me, he says, I can't help you anymore. And I just looked at him, I said, what? He says, you know, I'm busy, I've got a lot of stuff at work, I've got stuff going on in my own personal life, and I can't help you anymore. So I just got on the train, and I had this huge bag, and it wasn't until later that night that I had the strength to open it and really look through it. In his bag, when I start going through his bag, there was the printed lab report saying he was HIV negative. And there was his phone. And when I saw the phone, I called Umberto, who lived upstairs, because I didn't want to touch it and break it and do something that would erase something, and he came downstairs. And he turned the phone on, and there were the phone calls. And they were there, and the correct time was on the phone, and the correct time was on the phone calls.
At that point, when you see the HIV report, you know.
I know, they're lying. They just don't care. He's just a gay man. He's not Austrian, and they just don't care. They just don't care. They just don't care, or they're covering something up. Once I saw the phone and in the lab report saying he was negative, I'm sickened, I'm angry, and I'm scared because I don't know where to go with it. I can't trust the police. I've already met with the embassy, and I know the embassy's not going to do a damn thing for me.
This is the consulate office. This is where I had to sit with other people at a table, strangers filling out forms for passports, and talk about my missing gay son to the Consul General, I believe her title is, Constance Anderson. This is where she said she'd pray for my son. She grabbed a crucifix when I told her that he was gay.
I have the security liaison person doesn't want to be involved anymore.
My son used to work here.
Yes, please delete what you type right now. It's for security reasons. Either I call police. It's not allowed.
UNIDO doesn't want to ruffle the feathers because they're a guest in Austria. So although they'll send translators with me, they don't want to do anything else. And I'm at a loss. I knew that I really had to pull it together as much as I possibly could and find out the truth, because the police weren't gonna help me find the truth. I mean, he was my son, and if it took me for the rest of my life, I was gonna find out. So I just contacted people back here in the States, and I had one friend who's still with the police department, got in touch with an FBI agent, who got in touch with an FBI agent who's the chargé d'affaires at the embassy. But the only thing that they do are extraditions. They don't do investigations, so they couldn't help. And I lucked into talking to a person who knew a bookstore, gay bookstore owner in Vienna. So I thought, well, I got to start somewhere. I had no idea where it was going to lead.
And I ended up going to this gay bookstore.
This is the university section, and I'm walking down the street where the potted plant is in the windows. That's Cafe Burke. And then around the corner, where the rainbow flags is the bookstore.
I remember walking into the gay bookstore, and straight ahead of the door was a table with a book, and I looked at it and I started crying because it was a book that Aeryn had. And these two men were behind the counter and they were like, whoa, what is this? You know, and one came up to me and I said, I'm looking for Viet. He said, Viet? I said, Viet. And he says, that's me. And I told him, I said, I'm Aeryn Gillern's mother. And he looked at me, he says, I know Aeryn. And this was, again, all before it had been in the press.
And this is where he took me and we sat down.
So he took me into the back and I just blurted out everything, and he just sat there overwhelmed with all this, and he said, well, let me make some phone calls. And he says, I'm going to call somebody. He said 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks prior to Aeryn's disappearance, so around the middle of October, the police in Vienna started a gay and lesbian support group for gay and lesbian police officers to support them because of discrimination within the police department, and also to train them to be liaisons with the gay community, because the gay and lesbian community was so mistrustful of the police department. So he said, I know the person who's pretty much in charge of this. You know, he's a gay police officer, and I'm going to call him. So he called him, and Ewald said he would come and meet me that night. Ewald talked with me for about an hour. I gave him all the information that I had had. I told him about the 2 meetings that I had had with the police, the one on the 3rd and the one on the 6th, how upset I was at the treatment. And so Ewald went into the bookstore side of this place and called a friend of his who worked at the call center, which I assume is like a 911. His friend at the call center told him that there had been no calls in the 1st District on the 29th of October 2007. And Urania, the area where the fishermen were, are in the 1st District. That the scuba divers were never sent out, that the K-9 unit was never dispatched, and the fire department was not dispatched, and that no calls came in from the sauna that night either.
This is the cross street that even if Aeryn had come down from the Kaiserbrunde 1 block off, meaning the direction I'm facing, he would have had to cross.
It just, you know, my mind was going in so many different directions as it was, you know, because I was constantly vacillating between anger and sadness and just this emptiness and this shock feeling of dullness where there was nothing affecting me, and just this range of emotion. And then to see this, it was like, you know, I'd already felt uncomfortable with the police. I already mistrusted the police, and now it just confirmed it.
I just want answers. I want the truth. I want justice. I want my son. Most of all, I just want my son. I know everybody tells me to hope, and it's a very scary thing to hang on to.
On November 13th, he had a meeting with the police, and Ewald had arranged it through someone, he didn't tell me who, but somebody high up in the ranks. He said, you know, I've gotten a hold of somebody who's very interested in this, and this is a person who helped start the gay and lesbian support group, and they will have someone at that meeting, and you'll be okay. I said, all right. So myself and Angelica Radix, who is the psychologist at UNIDO, went to, again, the same building, the same room where I was given my son's belongings.
We went in, up these stairs and in.
We started off the meeting with Angelica saying to the investigator that sat to my right, we would like it very much if you would only talk for a minute or two and then give me time to translate and then talk again so that Aeryn's mother can understand what's going on and if she has any questions she can ask. And he looked at her and he just shook his head and he said, no. And he said something to her in German. And I could see her shoulders slumping. She looked at me, she says, no, he will conduct the meeting the way he wants to. So this investigator just started talking, just nonstop talking. And I kept on saying to her, what's he saying? She says, hold on, hold on. I said, what's he saying? And I was getting frustrated. And finally I said, this is unacceptable. This is unacceptable. And at that point, this is probably 10 minutes into this meeting, Lieutenant Heimetter stands up, he said, you're unacceptable. Your behavior is unacceptable. He says, you are rude. And I said, I am unacceptable? And I started crying. I said, I am not unacceptable. I said, I don't know what's going on, what's being said. I said, you speak English and you're letting this man speak in German and not let her translate. And you obviously now speak English. But I told him, I said, you are unacceptable. I said, this is wrong and you know this is wrong. And he rolled his eyes. He said, well, then you don't understand. You don't understand how an investigation works. And you don't understand things like spontaneous suicide. I said, I do understand, and I understand from talking to psychiatrists that there's no such thing as spontaneous suicide. And he comes over and he grabs a chair and he sits right down next to me, he puts his hands on my knees, and I went like this and I pushed them off. I said, don't touch me. Do not touch me. So he leaned forward and he said to me, he said, you used to be a police officer. And I sat there, I said, yes. And he said, what were you, a parking meter maid? And he went like that, and I said, no. I was a police officer. I was a neighborhood police officer.
Here, my lawyer. Arm down, break your fucking arm.
So, very cocky, he says, so do you have any more concerns? I said, excuse me? They just didn't like the tone. He said, do you have any more concerns you'd like to address with us? Seems like you have a lot of problems with the police. I said, I have a lot of questions, and I have a lot of concerns, but I don't think you're the one that I'm gonna go to with them. And he says, oh, he says, you'll run to somebody else and have them go above our heads? Then he had written down notes, and he said, you need to sign this. And it was in German. And I said, I'm not signing it. I'm not signing anything. He says, you have to sign it. And Angelica Radix, the psychologist translator, said, you need to sign it. I said, I'm not signing anything that I can't read. And she says, well, but I'm the translator. And I said, I'm not signing it. I said, because he was writing down things that aren't true, and I'm not signing it. There's no way I'm signing anything. And then he got distracted, and we just walked out.
All this time, there's been no press coverage of Aeryn.
Absolutely not. I raised the question with Lieutenant Heimetter about why there was no press coverage, and he said that he didn't feel it was necessary. And I told him, I said, well, how do you know that people didn't see something, that someone might not come forward, you know, or, you know, why wouldn't you put this in the press? So they did, and on the 20th it came out, and the headlines were, you know, startling. Naked UN diplomat runs naked through the streets. Mr. Gay Austria, gay this, gay that, spontaneous suicide. And I know it's not fair to stereotype an entire country or group of people, but all I could think of was 60 years ago, 64 years ago.
This is Judenplatz,
you know, they were doing the same thing.
This is the memorial for all the Austrian Jews that were killed during World War II.
When they gave up the Jewish population, when they gave up their homosexuals, you know, when they gave up their Jehovah's Witnesses, when they gave up, you know, people who were insane, you know, as they termed it. And it struck me that that caricature that they had painted along with much of Europe was the same caricature that they were using to paint my son. And they made him small. They just minimized him and just put all these labels on him so that he wasn't a real person anymore. And they won't speak to me. And they're turning my son into this creature, not even a person, to be mocked. And then just to be, yep, he's gone. Every morning, someone from UNIDO would call me and get me up in the morning. And
the view from the UN to Aeryn's apartment.
I'd get up and I'd go over, I'd have some breakfast and I'd go over UNIDO at the UN and I'd have lunch in the commissary because they had American food. I could bring home like real milk instead of Austrian milk. And I'd check my email and I'd talk to like Angelica Radix, the crisis psychologist, and then I'd go home for a while, back to Aeryn's apartment.
This is the neighborhood that I came up on.
It's Aeryn's mailbox 204-37.
And I couldn't watch TV because I didn't know what they were saying. And then I'd get dressed real warm, and I'd generally leave about 5. And I'd take the U-Bahn to the last stop. And I'd walk all the way back.
And this is Schweigman.
And then I'd stand in front of the Kaiserbrundel for about an hour or so, and you know, and if I got going earlier, I'd go to the churches too, if they were still open. Sometimes they stayed open later, and had a routine. On, I think it was December 4th or 5th, I went there and I was standing outside as normal as I did every night with a picture of Aeryn, and this young man came out and he spoke in halting English, but he says, "Oh, Aeryn, are you Aeryn's mother?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Oh, I knew Aeryn. He says, come on in. I said, "Come in?" He says, "Yeah, come on in." I said, I can't come in. He says, "Oh, yeah, you can come in." He had a woman by the name of Evelyn with him who was either American or Canadian, and she translated, and because Jens only spoke German, or so he said he did, and he took me on the tour. I shocked everybody by walking in, and the men standing at the counter to check in to get their towels and slippers. I mean, they were standing there with their Hamburg hats and their very well-tailored clothing, and you know, immediately newspapers came up in front of their face, probably thinking I was somebody's wife. And actually, I wanted to see it because I wanted to see the layout. I wanted to see if there were video cameras. I wanted to see what the place looked like. And he kept on stopping and crying. And at one point, I reached out to touch his shoulder because I was trying to act very poised and Like, I just wanted to see the architecture and stuff. And she said, don't touch him, don't touch him. And I was like, okay, okay. She says, you just have to let him be. She said, this is very hard for him. And, you know, and I'm just keeping things inside thinking, hard for him. And then we got to this one room with murals on the wall, and he stood there and he just kind of went like this, and he started crying, and he went down on the floor, and he just started doing this on the tiles. And inside, I was freaking out, because I thought, what is going on? But I didn't want them to think that I was there trying to get information, because then I knew they'd get rid of me. So I was like, what's going on? Should we? She says, no, this is the last place that he saw Aeryn.
So he's like down on the floor?
He's down on the floor, and he's literally on the floor, and he's rubbing the tiles. And then he gets himself up, and he's crying, and he's just holding himself like this. And we went through a few other rooms, and then we went back upstairs. And I asked her, I said, ask him what happened to my son. And she just looked at me, she says, he doesn't want to talk about it. She says, you need to know, she said, that your son is gone. And she said, it doesn't matter what happened here, your son is gone. And I just looked at her, I said, but it does matter. I need to know what happened to my son. She says, it doesn't matter what happened to him here, your son is gone. Then she told me that he had a present for me, and he gave me 2 polo tops that had Kaiser Brundle on it. And at that point, I was ushered out. That was it.
When you were on your tour, did you see any video cameras there?
Yes, I did.
How many, like, where were there video cameras?
There was video cameras at the entrance, there was video cameras downstairs, and in one of the hallways, there was a video camera.
Do you know if the police ever looked at the tapes?
I don't know that. I don't know that the police ever looked at anything or interviewed anybody.
So do you think they know what happened?
Yes, I do believe that they know what happened. I wanted to stay at his apartment. I just wanted to live there and wait for him. I couldn't pay the mortgage, and I couldn't pay the rent at the same time over there. The rent was coming due, and I couldn't get a job because I wasn't an Austrian citizen. The only place I could work was at the UN, and they didn't have a job for me, and I wasn't in any condition to work. It was terrible. It was really bad. I think the worst part, even more so than getting on the airplane, was packing up Aeryn's things and giving his things away. Shipping home what I could ship home. I shipped home all his movies. He had like a couple hundred movies. He loved movies. And CDs, he loved music. And I couldn't leave any of that stuff there, and I couldn't give any of that stuff away. But he had a home. It wasn't just his apartment, he had a home. He had pots and pans and linens. He loved to cook, all kinds of cookware. And, I've probably got 3 knives and 3 forks and 3 spoons and a couple glasses. And he had a home. And he had decorations, and he had books, and he had, tchotchkes all over the place, and he had pictures on the wall, and I packed all the pictures, and I packed what I could, but he had toasters, he had mixers, he had all these baking things, he had a washing machine, he had this table that he had picked out, he had this sofa bed, he had his bed, all his furniture, all these things that were important to him. I was just leaving him, and I was just getting rid of all his stuff. And that hurt the most. Because it's all I had left was just his material possessions.
Here's where my stuff goes in, my coats and stuff. Again, there's pictures there. I always keep pictures of people. And there's pictures on the wall there. Let's see. There's Rahman, and you're there. And the rest of the pictures with grandmother and great-grandfather. And there's your dad and you and Rahman there. Okay, and this is when you come into the house here. I'm at the front door. Oh, there it is, okay. And there's the door to the room. And there's father up in the corner. This is my closet. This is your room when you come to visit. Hold on. Okay, see?
Aeryn had a great soaking tub. It was real deep and big, and I'd run the water real hot, and I'd close the door, and I'd shove a washcloth in my mouth, and I'd scream. And I'd cry, and I'd cry, and I'd cry, and I'd cry.
So that's it for me. I love you. I hope you guys are doing well. Come visit one day when you can. And I hope you can actually watch this video. I hope it'll support the hell out of you. So, loves, kisses, and talk to you later. Bye.
I just wanted to wait for him. And I felt like I was abandoning him by coming home. I didn't have a choice. I had to come home. So when I came home, it was like I didn't know what I was gonna do. I wanted to go right back to work. I had to stay busy, because otherwise I was afraid I was gonna go nuts. I was just gonna live with it. I was just gonna go to counseling, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I just dove right back into work. I literally just dove back into work. I'd work 10, 12 hours a day, because I thought if I'd exhaust myself, you know, and just keep busy with everything else, get involved with all the drama at work, with the employees, with the animals, that I wouldn't have to deal with it. I was just this automaton that was going to work every day, trying to exhaust herself, and then coming home every night and crying and crying and crying and literally howling like a wolf with so much pain and emptiness. You know, I tried reading. Reading was real hard, and I always loved reading, but if I read 10 pages and then put the book down, the next night I'd have to read 9 to be able to figure out what I had read the night before, so I never got very far very fast. All my friends kept on saying, you gotta talk to someone, you know, talk to this newspaper, talk to that, call this, we're gonna call this, and I'm like, nope, because I didn't trust the media. I was afraid that they were gonna hurt him, and he'd already been hurt and minimized, and I couldn't let anybody else hurt him. I had to protect him. And if it meant keeping it out of the media, then I was gonna keep it out of the media. And then in June, the board changed at the SPCA, and in July, they were gonna fire me, plain and simple. I didn't fit into their clique, and so I resigned, and I spent 2 weeks really weepy and depressed and everything, because it was like, oh my God, I have no structure now, I have nothing. All I have is this loop going around in my head. I had a rule, and my counselor hates that I had this rule, but it was like, I don't cry before 4. You know, look credible, look sure of yourself, look strong, whatever. And I tried to keep that rule in effect for those 7 months that I was in sheer avoidance. And then there wasn't anything to hide behind anymore when I didn't have the job at the shelter. there were no more walls for me to hide behind. And then I realized that this isn't just gonna go away. I started making phone calls and letting people know. And my friends were very helpful and knew that this was what I needed to do, knew that this was the healthiest thing for me to do.
A miraculous medal, a race number, a bear sewed in 8th grade, and a video. Mementos of a son Kathy Gillern hasn't heard from since October.
After several attempts to contact the Austrian police, Kathy Gillern finally got a one-page response in May stating that her son was reported missing along with his case number. She says the U.S. State Department is unable to force another government to further investigate, so right now she's just praying for a miracle.
Kathy Gillern will be in Austria on October 29th, the one-year anniversary of her son's disappearance, and she plans on making this trip every single year until she brings him home.
Why did you return to Vienna?
Because I missed Aeryn. Because I felt Aeryn, and because Aeryn's in Vienna.
It amazes me sometimes how someplace so beautiful can bring back so much pain. I believe that's the Danube.
Einen schönen Tag noch, vielen Dank und auf Wiedersehen.
I'm in Vienna Airport.
Tell me about the vigil that you held.
The vigil was just a very subdued one, just very quiet. I had it directly across the street from the Kaiser Brundle sauna, which is probably only like maybe 20 feet. It was just literally across a one-lane street, that's it. But the sauna didn't want me to interfere with their business and wanted me to take my sadness and affection somewhere else. So I took it across the street in the side doorway of the Franciscan church. And the Franciscan church was, the first time I went to visit Aeryn was the first church that he took me to. There was a couple churches that he really liked.
When we came here that night, November 1st, the first night that I was here, we actually looked behind everything that we could, thinking that maybe he was passed out.
Several people that were going into the sauna or coming out of the sauna came over because we had his picture, and they came over and they talked, most in English. You know, oh, remember Aeryn? We had great discussions with Aeryn.
A lot of other people have stopped and said that they were praying, that they would pray. Mm-hmm. And one man speaking English walked by and read it, asked some questions, and said, I will inquire about this.
It was just very nice that people stopped by. But one of the strange things that happened, and again, it didn't hit me till, I don't think it hit me till I got home, was we were standing there, is that all of a sudden there was a priest standing in front of me. And I looked and I said, I hope it's okay that we're standing here. And he said, oh, no, sure, so it is. And again, it didn't hit me till I came home. He was Irish. And how bizarre was that? Here was this Irish priest in Vienna, and he says, I'm praying for him. I'm praying for Aeryn. It was just very odd because he had just walked up and he looked at me. He didn't look at the signs. He just walked up and looked at me and he said Aeryn's name. In my mind, I like to imagine that Aeryn sent him, you know. And he knew I'd get a kick out of an Irish priest. So I think that was just something special that he did for me. What I did learn after I came back, I had met with a reporter, Joseph Gepp from The Falter, and he did 2 articles for the newspaper. And in it, he says that there were no witnesses, because this is what the police have always said, that there's no witnesses except for the fishermen. And the next day, he had an email from a university student that said he saw Aeryn, that he and his girlfriend saw Aeryn. And Joseph wrote to me, he says, I'm not sure whether to believe them or not.
This is the U-Bahn station, and the students were standing somewhere around here and saw Aeryn running up these steps.
Initially, when Joseph emailed me and told me that people had seen my son running, my whole belief system fell apart. Because then I was like, have I been in denial? Did he jump up from the sauna and just run and jump into the canal? And Joseph called them, and then he met with them. And they were out walking. They saw Aeryn run near the Kaiser Grundle, naked, covering his privates. And the girl, they said that they thought that maybe it was a college prank or something. So the girl did the wolf whistle, and that Aeryn stopped and turned and looked at him.
According to the witnesses, this is approximately where they saw Aeryn, and they were over there.
And the way they described it to Joseph is that they've never seen anyone look so scared in their life. I wrote him plain and simple. I said, so did he commit so he committed spontaneous suicide? And he wrote back, he says, nobody says that, except for the police. He says, don't go there. He said, something happened. Something happened to your son. Something happened at the sauna, and after that, we're gonna have to figure out what happened then. And he says, but irregardless, he says, if your son ended up in the canal, he says, it wasn't his choice. What's interesting is when Joseph presented this information to the police said, no, there weren't any witnesses. These people are lying. So these people said that they didn't call the police, but on the 20th, when they saw it in the newspaper, the next day they called the police, that the police sent over 2 investigators and that they gave a statement. And the police say, no, they're lying. So these people are either credible enough or stupid enough, the gentleman was anyway, to give his name and allow Joseph to do another story, including the man's name, saying what the man saw, and the man saying, I don't know why the police would say that nobody came forward. And like Joseph said, he says, I believe him. And he said, and he's willing to give his name and willing to speak out against the police. And that's huge there. That is absolutely huge. Why lie about a witness? Why would you lie about someone coming forward and saying they saw him? If they had told me back then, I would have went like this. I would have stopped and said, geez, what are we missing? What are we missing? Then let's concentrate on the goddamn sauna and find out what happened there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think this was entertainment for them. They weren't afraid to change a story like that in front of other people. They weren't afraid of telling things that couldn't possibly be true in front of other people. They weren't afraid of showing, like the SMS things and saying in front of other people and reconstructing it. They weren't afraid of doing any of this. And that's what's so scary. I know from being a police officer, that's a whole lot easier to show up at a crime scene, see a dead body and go, yep, suicide. So, you know, I'm communicating with friends back home, and they're saying, you know, hire a private investigator, hire an attorney. UNIDO sets me up with a freebie session with an attorney who speaks English, well, kind of. And he tells me, he says, well, you know, put your police hat on and think about it. He says, you've got a gay sauna in the fanciest district of Vienna. How do you think it existed this long? He said, don't you think there's somebody connected to the sauna in government or the police department or whatever? And I'm thinking, yeah. He says, you'll never find the truth. I've talked to several police and they all say the case was botched. There's so many things wrong, but they cannot talk about it for fear of their life. That, to me, means something big. But what that is and whether I'll ever find out, I don't know. And that's what scares me, that I will have to live with not knowing. I mean, knowing is still going to be difficult to live with because I still won't have Aeryn. But not knowing is just this perpetual limbo. I met with the Green Party when I was in Austria. Thankfully, Aeryn had a very good friend, Florian, who came to the vigil, and Florian has friends in high places. So Florian arranged an interview meeting with me and two members of Parliament, one that deals primarily with police issues and one that deals specifically with gay and lesbian issues in the police. And I met with them, sent them all the information that I had. They spoke to several people, and they have filed an official inquest, and it's been accepted by the Minister of the Interior, Maria Fechter.
So when you heard there was going to be an inquest, what did you immediately think?
I was excited. I was excited that the Green Party was even interested in doing anything, that they were outraged at, you know, the things that I had told them, the way the police had acted. So I thought this was going to be a really good thing. I was very excited about it. Were that the truth was going to come out, that the police were going to have to admit that they lied, admit that they had fabricated, that they had manipulated information, and that they had treated the case badly, that they had defamed my son, that they had treated me bad, and in Aeryn's absence, they had treated him deplorably. An inquest is, from what I understood from the Green Party, is supposed to be an external review of what the police department did or didn't do. What happened was it was turned over to the police department to review themselves. In the inquest, the police say that they did not respond, that the fire department did, and that the head of the fire department unit that responded decided that the water current was going too strong to put divers in the water, so the divers didn't get dispatched to the scene, and that they cleared. They didn't dredge, they didn't go in the water, they didn't put boats out, he didn't ask for a canine unit, they didn't do anything. It totally absolved the police of any involvement whatsoever. I walked around. I mean, it was early in the day, and I ended up just walking around. I didn't have anything planned for the rest of the day. I didn't feel defeated. I can't say I was any more depressed than I was over you know, any other news from the police, because it wasn't unexpected. Aeryn loved Vienna. Everything about it. The people got dressed up. That was a big thing. Vienna was his literal cup of tea, because he could get dressed up and he could walk around and feel proud of himself. He loved the culture. He loved the architecture. He loved everything about it. just the fact that it was old, that it had tradition. We went around and he showed me all the buildings that he loved.
Church up in the distance called the Mexico Church.
There is the term, the Donald term, it's kind of shaky. And that was the tallest building in Europe for a long time.
He loved the history of it, the Habsburgs, the Kaiser and Sisi and all that.
That's an old statue of old Kaiser, Franz Josef. This is part of the old palace. It's called the Hofburg.
We went to the Habsburg Palace and just everything. He just loved it, and I appreciated it. I do feel that I'm trying to prove that I'm right, and they're helping, whether they know it or not. I mean, you know, a wall will get knocked down, or maybe even just a brick gets loose in the wall, but they do it themselves. You know, a little, you know, tap on the wall and something will fall and something else will come into place that will substantiate what I knew the first or second week after Aeryn disappeared. What I knew, what I felt. And then they come forward and go, oh, yes, this, well, yes, this, well, no, this. And it's like, gee, well, that's what I've been saying all along. I guess my hope is that I keep it going. I'll just keep on knocking more bricks out. And my ultimate hope is that somebody develops a conscience at some point and comes forward. A police officer can't look at himself in the mirror anymore and says, I know what happened.
A mother here in central New York is searching for her son. He disappeared 3 years ago. Caitlin Nuclo reports.
Kathy Gillern is packing her bags and setting off on a search to find out what happened to her son.
I once was told that justice delayed was justice denied. So at this point, I don't know if there's going to be any justice. All I can fight for is the truth, and hopefully being able to bring Aeryn home.
No two things